Hi everybody and welcome to English for You. I'm Pat.
And I'm Mike.
So today we're talking about capital cities. You must have visited quite a few capital cities in your life. Any stood out as like, oh, I really liked being here?
Interesting. Well, I lived in London, which of
Right.
course is a well-known capital city. That's very impressive because you have all the government buildings and the famous statues and other stuff like that. Tokyo is a great capital city, capital of both the country politically and, of course, the biggest, most important city in the country as well. So what about you? Those are some of the big ones. Have you visited some,
I've visited a few smaller ones. Some I liked a lot. Edinburgh. I studied in Edinburgh at university. Beautiful city that I could have happily lived in. I had a good time visiting Dublin in the Republic of Ireland.
City too. Been there, yeah?
I have been to Paris, but I was a kid and I can't remember it. I have been to Wellington in New Zealand, which was a very beautiful city.
Nice,
I had a nice time visiting Wellington. Of course, Taipei, where we live in Taipei, and we like Taipei very much. But sometimes you might think, well, hang on, what is the capital of that country? Because you think particularly Australia. I've heard a few people say, hang on, so Sydney is not the capital?
That's right. Now, in many cases, like the ones I mentioned, London, Tokyo, it's the biggest city, the most famous city, and the capital city, Taipei as well. But when you say something like New York City, well, a lot of people would know that that's the biggest city in America, but it's not the capital city.
That's right.
So, Sydney, Australia, you mentioned. Biggest, most popular city in Australia, but not the capital.
Been to Toronto, I've been to Vancouver, but neither of those are the capital of Canada.
No, sir.
So we're going to read about that in today's article. Let's check it out.
Reading.
Confusing capitals. When small cities help governments work. Australia is a popular place for travelers, especially Sydney, one of the world's most famous cities. Many people think they're in Australia's capital city when they're in Sydney. However, anyone looking for Parliament House will be disappointed. The government is actually in Canberra, about a 3-hour drive south. A similar problem happens when people visit Toronto. As it's Canada's largest city, many think it's the capital. This was true at one point in time, but by 1867, Ottawa had become the official seat of power. Canadian politicians wanted this location because it's on the border between the French and English cultures. This has helped the government give equal treatment to both. This kind of political compromise was common. Canberra was chosen because it's between two of Australia's largest cities, Sydney and Melbourne. As well, the US capital was moved from New York to Washington, D.C. to satisfy the wishes of other regions. There's an added benefit to remote capital cities. They help small regions grow their populations and become cultural centers.
So we start this article and we'll kind of follow on from what we mentioned in our introduction. We say Australia is a popular place for travelers.
Absolutely.
Yep, I've been to Melbourne. I had a very nice time there. I've got some family near there. I did enjoy my little 2 weeks down under.
There you go. So it is a very popular place. More and more people are going there. Plane travel, of course, is making it much easier to get to Australia, even though it is pretty far south. But it's top on many tourists' lists, especially Sydney, one of the world's most famous cities. And many people would say one of the world's most beautiful cities, right?
You've got the harbour area, the Opera House, the big bridge and all of that stuff. Now, we see in the article that many people think they're in Australia's capital city when they're in Sydney. Okay, capital, of course, is the country's kind of centre of government. As we said in the introduction, it's often the biggest city, but it is not always the biggest city. But it always is where the government is located. It's the sort of where they kind of control the country from. In our example sentence, we throw out another capital city. Nairobi is the capital of Kenya,
Absolutely.
Africa.
There you go. So it's important to differentiate between the biggest, most famous city and the capital. Often they are the same, like with London, Paris, Tokyo somewhere like that. But in other cases, they're not. But the capital will be where the government is, where the president or prime minister lives most of the time. It's the official city of the country, the government city. So if you're in Sydney thinking, hey, it's the biggest, most famous city in Australia, must be the capital, the president must be around here somewhere, the prime minister, you would be wrong. However, anyone looking for Parliament House will be disappointed. Anyone looking for the government center, the government official buildings where the prime minister or president lives, or where the Leaf-IUN, where the legislature meets, you won't find it in Sydney. If you go looking, you will be disappointed. You won't find it. It's not there. Okay, so we have this word Parliament House. As you can see, it's a big P and a big H. So we know we're talking about a thing, an actual real thing. That's the name for basically the Leaf-IUN in Australia. It might be called Government House. It might be called the House of Legislature, the legislature, something like that. But it's where all the politicians meet, where debates take place, where laws get passed and all that kind of stuff, where the business of government happens. Parliament House is one of the key buildings for that place. So there I am, I'm in Sydney, I'm trying to find the Prime Minister of Australia. I want to complain about the koalas, but he's not there. He's not in Sydney. Everyone's like, he ain't here, mate. So where is he?
Well, we see in the article that the government is actually in Canberra.
Canberra?
About a 3-hour drive south.
Oh man, I gotta go there to complain about the koalas?
You do indeed, because that's where the government is. Okay? The government is the group of people who run a country. Okay?
Basically.
They are the people elected in most of the time by us when we vote. We choose which ones we want to go and be our political parties and represent our needs, and they will then make the laws. Some governments are divided into groups of executive and legislative. Some are kind of all thrown together a bit, kind of like the British government is sort of a mixture of both kinds of groups. You might be wondering, what's the difference between Parliament and government? Basically, we use Parliament when the country has a king or queen. And we use government for pretty much everywhere else. That is, in a very simple way, the difference. Here's an example sentence. According to government officials, people will need to pay for plastic bags next year. So this is a government rule that is introduced by the government, by the rulers of the country.
So there you go. So far, we've learned that if you want to find where the government is in Australia, find the town of Canberra, which is not the biggest city in the country,
it's
not even
very small.
Top 3 probably.
I don't think it's even top 6.
Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne,
Perth, Adelaide, it's smaller than all of those.
All those are much bigger. All right, so a similar problem, a similar situation happens when people visit Toronto, the city of Toronto in Canada, or as the locals would say, Toronto.
Toronto, they drop that T out.
They drop it out.
Okay, so as it's Canada's largest city, many think it's the capital.
Right, because that's the way it is in many places.
It's normally the case. Biggest city, most population, most space, one of the more famous names that everybody knows. Why isn't the government there?
There you go. And this was true at one point in time. So back in history, back in the past, Toronto was the capital of Canada. I think it was called York, actually, for quite a long time. But anyways, by 1867, Ottawa had become the official seat of power. So like in Australia, Canberra is a smaller city, but that's where the government is. In Canada, the city is called Ottawa. Not a big city, mostly government workers and stuff, but that is where the government will meet.
I've been there. It was quite a nice city, but there wasn't a lot happening. I was only there for a couple of days, saw what we wanted to see, and then we moved on.
Okay. Some people say Ottawa is the city that fun forgot. Anyways, let's get back to official. This word is official. And official is an adjective that basically means coming from the government or from some higher authority or power. If you get stopped by the police, you need to listen to what they are telling you because they are official government workers. They have uniform, a badge, and a license, or the law supports their actions. So if something is official, it comes from the government, it's supported by the law, and the normal common people are kind of required to do what they say, to follow that law. But basically it has the government stamp of approval saying, we the government approve of this. For example, E pluribus unum is the official motto of the USA. You'll actually see that it's on the money or somewhere like that. People might say America, land of the free, home of the brave. That's a motto, but the official government motto, which you'll see on signs or flags or things like that, is E pluribus unum, from many one.
Ah, that's what it means. Okay, so how did the capital change and why did it stop being Toronto or York and become Ottawa?
Or Montreal.
Yeah.
It was Montreal for a while.
Okay. You
Way
want it back?
in the day? No.
You want the government there?
No.
No. Okay, well, let's look at the article. Canadian politicians wanted this location,
Ottawa,
because it's on the border between the French and the English cultures.
I heard it was Queen Victoria, actually, who picked it.
Okay,
They
well...
kind of showed her a map, and they said it could be Kingston or it could be Ottawa, which are very close. And she said, I like Ottawa.
Did she now?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, what I know is that that's true. There is a river there, and on one side of the river, you're in the English-speaking Ontario, and on the other side, you're in the French-speaking Quebec.
Hull.
Yeah, Hull. There's a French name, isn't it? Begins with G? Something like that?
Possibly.
I've forgotten the
I
name.
haven't been there in a while.
I stayed in the French-speaking part. Our hotel was there. We ate a few times around there. It was quite nice, actually. And then we crossed over the bridge to see all the government buildings on the other side.
That's true. I was joking. Ottawa may not be the most exciting place in the world, but it's a lovely city, very green, wonderful museums
very nice.
and stuff.
A few parks that we went to.
Definitely worth visiting.
So here in that sentence, we use the word location. The location is the place where something is, okay? It is just as simple as that. It's where something is. For example, we could ask, do you know the location of next week's dinner party? So meaning, do you know where next week's dinner party is going to take place? You could talk about finding a location to shoot a movie, the place where you're going to film it, and so on. So here we're talking about the location on the border between two of Canada's provinces.
There you go. Gatineau.
That's it, Gatineau.
Okay, in that previous sentence we had this word border, talking about places being on the border of these two areas. What is a border? Well, this noun basically means that place where two countries or two towns or two regions, areas, territories where they touch. Generally, we don't really notice the border between Taichung County and Taichung City if we're traveling in Taiwan because nothing really changes. But when it becomes a national border between two countries, that's much more important. Now, we don't really have this problem in Taiwan because if we leave the country, we're traveling overseas, so we're landing in an airport or something like that. But in a place like Europe or in a place in North America with lots of countries in one area, you might have borders and you might travel across them. You'll definitely need your passport. The police will stop you and ask you, why are you coming into our country? What are you planning to do? How long will you stay? You know, those questions they ask at the airport. In this case, though, you're on the land and the border will be marked by signs or fences or things like that. And generally, you'll be expected to stop and tell them who you are and what you're doing. For example, you must show your passport and ID when you cross the border between Canada and the USA, and it might take some time.
So we saw that Ottawa is located on the border. Its location is on the border between the French and English-speaking regions of Canada.
Yep.
And as the article says, this has helped the government give equal treatment to both.
There you go.
In theory.
They didn't want one group to have more power than the other, so very wisely they put the capital between the main centers of both sides. And this kind of political compromise was common. This was considered, as I said, a wise move to have a compromise so that no one group gets more power than the other. Things hopefully stay nice and even and balanced, and everyone can try to get along. That's what a compromise basically is. It's an agreement where both sides agree. It might not be perfect and exactly what either side want. One group has to give up something they want. The other side has to do the same. But hopefully if people compromise, if I see that you're trying to find an agreement and I'm doing the same in good faith with a good attitude, then hopefully the agreement will be lasting and much more solid than if one group gets all the power and the other group has nothing. That's not going to make things nice and even.
Exactly. It's an acceptable solution to all sides. So if we go back to the Australian example, we see Canberra was chosen because it's between two of Australia's largest cities, Sydney and Melbourne. So they're going to put it in a place where neither city and their kind of influence is going to have too much of an effect on the country.
So there you go. It's a good solution if you're trying to find a compromise. But there are other reasons to have a special city for your capital. It says as well, the U.S. capital was moved from New York to Washington, D.C. to satisfy the wishes of other regions. New York was quite far north. The capital used to be in Boston, I believe, earlier than that, or in Philadelphia, which is just to the west of New York. But this is all sort of in the northeastern part of the big American country. So they kind of thought, why don't we put it further in the south? So, you know, it's a little bit more equal and it's easier for people from all parts of the country to come to the capital.
Exactly. Now, as Mike said, there are other reasons to sort of put your city or capital in a place. We see there's an added benefit to remote capital cities. They help small regions grow their populations and become cultural centers.
Sure.
Okay. So in that sentence, we're using the word added as an adjective. We often use the VING or the PP forms of verbs as adjectives, and they always come before a noun. So for a VING adjective, we could say things like cleaning products, drinking water, a cat's scratching post, and so on. And when we do this, the VING adjective kind of describes the purpose of the noun. Water that is for drinking, drinking water. We can also use the VING form of verbs to mean something that's happening right now. A burning house, a sleeping baby, falling leaves, running water. It explains what the noun is doing. For PP form adjectives, we have things like an added benefit, a stolen painting, an injured man, and so on. These describe the state of the noun, and we often imply that the action that caused the noun to be in that state has already happened. It's been completed. Now, we often also think about VING and ED adjectives when we talk about emotions. So the difference between the words bored and boring. Remember the rule for this one? The VING form describes the thing that causes the emotion, and the PP form describes the way someone feels. I am bored because the book is boring. To use an example similar to the one from the article, we could say, be careful as there is broken glass on the floor. So we talked about being an added benefit of putting a capital in a remote, a faraway region. When we say benefit, what do we mean?
Yeah, well, a benefit, this noun basically just means a good thing, something that will help you, a positive, a bonus. Yes, please, I like that very much, okay? It's not a negative, it's not a drawback, it's not a weakness, it's not something that's going to make your life harder or more difficult. It's the opposite. It's going to make your life better, more enjoyable, easier, just positive in some kind of way. For example, my 3 months of Japanese classes were a real benefit when I went to Japan. I still could have gone to Japan, but having a little bit of Japanese in my mind and my skill set was a real benefit, a real positive, a real plus. It helped me, get help at the train station or take a taxi or ask some questions, things like that. So a benefit is a good thing that you would be interested in having.
Okay, that's the end of today's article. We'll be back to look at some examples of smaller and unusual capital cities tomorrow. Right now, let's go to our For You Chat question.
For You Chat.
So our article's question is, what are some other good reasons for having a small capital city? And what are some of the bad points of a small capital far away from big cities? I suppose one good advantage, if your capital or government is further away from the big business, then hopefully that means the big business will have a little bit less of an influence on the government. Maybe that distance helps kind of create a bit of separation so the government isn't only making laws to help the big businesses.
Possibly, but Washington, D.C. is away from New York City, and big business has a lot of effect in Washington, D.C.
Yes, it does.
Money is powerful. But here's another one. I think just the idea of small cities are much more attractive these days, right? 100, 200 years ago, a lot of people wanted to live in the biggest city, have the biggest city, be the biggest city. But I think now, with so many people and pollution and all the problems, a lot of people are a lot more interested in living in a smaller city of maybe 1 or 2 million people rather than a big city of 5 or 7 million people because of all the problems that come with it. So I think even now, I mean today, even more than in the past, maybe a small city capital would be more attractive to some countries.
Some bad points, of course, if this small capital is far away from the big cities. Yeah, it's harder for people to get there if you want to go and, as Mike was talking about, protest against the government, talk to the government. If you're an ambassador who wants to visit the government, you go to the city and you go, well, it's kind of nice, but if you go to Australia, you're in Canberra, you go, this is a nice city, but I wanted to see some stuff in Sydney.
True. And
I wanted to be shown around.
And as a tourist, it would be more frustrating because it's nice to be able to go to Tokyo, see the big buildings, see all the shopping, see the Parliament building or where the emperor lives, and go home. You don't have to go to 2 or 3 places to see the most important cities of the country.
Okay, well, that's all we have time for today, but join us again tomorrow for some more on capital cities. See you then. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Confusing capitals. When small cities help governments work. Australia is a popular place for travelers, especially Sydney, one of the world's most famous cities. Many people think they're in Australia's capital city when they're in Sydney. However, anyone looking for Parliament House will be disappointed. The government is actually in Canberra, about a 3-hour drive south. A similar problem happens when people visit Toronto. As it's Canada's largest city, many think it's the capital. This was true at one point in time, but by 1867, Ottawa had become the official seat of power. Canadian politicians wanted this location because it's on the border between the French and English cultures. This has helped the government give equal treatment to both. This kind of political compromise was common. Canberra was chosen because it's between 2 of Australia's largest cities, Sydney and Melbourne. As well, the US capital was moved from New York to Washington, D.C. to satisfy the wishes of other regions. There's an added benefit to remote capital cities. They help small regions grow their populations and become cultural centers.
Vocabulary Review.
Capital. Jamie works for the president, so she lives in this country's capital. Government. Several members of the government wrote a new law to raise taxes on rich people. Official. The boss's assistant was sent to the meeting in an official role to ask some important questions. Location. The company thinks that the night market near Kaohsiung Arena MRT station is the best location for its new restaurant. Border. Helen stopped her car at the border and the officers let her into the country after looking at her ID. Benefit. Being close to nature is one of the benefits of living in a small village.
智慧小补帖
Parliament House. Compromise.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作。活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net